discussion with us later on with Martha Nyagaya. But then before we delve into that interview with the country director at Nutrition International, and you know, when you buy, as you buy salt, maize flour or wheat flour, do you ever notice fortified written on the package? Have you ever asked yourself what it means? And food fortification is the process of adding micronutrients actually to the food. And micronutrients deficiency remains an obstacle to overall national development. And that is why we are having this conversation. And joining me is Martha Nyagaya virtually. She is the country director at Nutrition International. Just to try and paint for us a picture what it means when we talk about food fortification. And Martha, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us here on KTN News Center this morning to talk to us about this important topic about food fortification. So I'd like us to begin this conversation, first of all, by you just trying to explain to us, you know, how do we narrow down to the food for... I suggest that we start with the question on the burden on malnutrition in the country, even as we talk about food fortification.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me. So Kenya is faced with what we call the triple burden of malnutrition, where we have the coexistence of undernutrition, overnutrition, and micronutrient deficiencies. And how do we tackle that in this country? Let me just briefly explain to you what that means. Undernutrition is a situation where a child does not get enough nutrients or all the nutrients they need. And it is manifested in stunting. We see children who are too short for their ages. And this means that the child predominantly consumes inadequate diet for a long time. We also have wasting, where the children are just thin or underweight, where the children do not weigh the quantity of kilograms they're supposed to weigh. And then we have overnutrition, where we are seeing overweight and obesity. So you find a stunted child and an obese mother in the same household. And then we have micronutrient deficiencies. For example, in women of reproductive age in this country, 42% of them are iron deficient. It means they are not eating enough quantities of iron-rich foods sourced from fresh green leafy vegetables and meat, fish, and chicken products. And we also have about a quarter of our children not just undernourished, but anemic. And also about 81% of our children who are zinc deficient. So these are micronutrients, and that's why we say that Kenya has the triple burden of malnutrition, where we have undernutrition, overnutrition, and micronutrient deficiencies coexisting in the same households. Now, food fortification is one of the key elements of an overall strategy for addressing malnutrition. And this is coupled with diversification of diets through production systems, supplementation in situations where communities cannot access these micronutrients and need them urgently, like during pregnancy. And we also have nutrition education that goes with these interventions, and public health measures such as deworming, malaria prevention and control to reduce the prevalence of this intervention.
But then, Martha, you know, when you talk about food fortification, and when I was beginning this conversation, I was just taking our viewers through what food fortification is, especially when we buy food products from the shop, you know, such as maize flour, wheat flour. There's that sign that, not even sign, a writing on the packet that has been, you know, indicated fortified. So how will I know that that maize flour or wheat flour has been, actually, it's been fortified?
So let me just explain a little bit. Food fortification is the addition of vitamins and minerals on common staple foods. So we know that people eat these foods on a daily basis. We know that people can afford them. And so it is the addition of those vitamins in those foods. When you go to the supermarket, you will see that all flour, maize flour, wheat flour, salt, is having a fortification sign. That is the way that we expect consumers to tell that this food is fortified or has added vitamins and minerals. So food fortification is the process of adding those vitamins and minerals. And fortification was made mandatory through an amendment of the Foods and Drugs and Chemical Substance Law in Kenya in 2012. So the regulation requires that all maize, all wheat flour, all fats and oils be fortified with specific vitamins and minerals.
Right.
And to enable the consumer to tell that the food is fortified according to the law, there is a sign that is on that food, and the food is clearly labeled fortified maize flour, fortified.
All right. I do apologize for that technical hitch that Martha is experiencing from her side, but I believe right now she's okay, Martha. Martha, I believe right now you're okay. We're just experiencing some technical hitch from your side. But then, so Martha, kindly narrow it down for us. You know, the food fortification as a strategy, as a nation, what strategy should we put in place, especially for families living in the rural areas who can't afford a balanced diet, who can't afford food that have micronutrients or, you know, different micronutrients as a way of just ensuring that they live a healthy life?
So, like I mentioned, food fortification is already put in place in Kenya by law. So anybody who is processing wheat flour, maize flour, fats or oils should fortify their products. However, for maize, for example, small and medium scale millers are facing challenges in fortifying their products. Despite the regulation to have all packed maize flour fortified, most small and medium scale millers face technical and financial challenges in implementing fortification. And the sad thing is that that is where most of our poor people who really need fortified foods buy their foods from. So some of these challenges include that lead to some food safety issues.
Right.
So what the government needs to do to ensure compliance and enforcement of the food fortification law, the first thing is market surveillance. And so in 2020, Nutrition International supported 10 counties with market surveillance. And it is very unfortunate that only 28% of maize flour in the market was adequately fortified.
All right.
And only about 34% of wheat flour was adequately fortified.
All right.
So some of the things that we need to do to ensure that the rural poor communities access fortified foods is to support small and medium scale millers with capacity, with dosing systems, with the standard operating procedures, because they may not be able to access the law and the standards.
All right. So
and also, they may not be able to access the premix that should be used for fortification.
All right, so Martha, so why is food fortification assumed to be, you know, most cost-effective compared to other methods of nutrition? Because growing up, we would see actually in the village, even until now, you just go get maize from the shamba, take it and, you know, have your food at the end of the day. And people tend to think like people in the rural areas are eating a more balanced diet.
So Nutrition International and a number of partners have done studies on the cost effectiveness of food fortification. And with a cost-benefit ratio of roughly 1 to 30 for salt iodization, for example, what is the cost of salt? 10 to 15 shillings. Everybody can afford salt. And so adding iodine to salt does not cost even $1 more. The average cost of adding fortificants to food is less than $4 per metric ton. So it is cost effective in the sense that it does not increase the cost of the staple food that is usually consumed by large populations of people, and it is a driver of a key nutrient required by those populations.
All right.
Fortification is also deemed successful because it makes frequently eaten foods more nutritious without relying on changing the behavior of the consumer, because it's a food that is consumed anyway.
All right.
And so there's a high population coverage, and millers usually have one-time expense for equipment on beginning fortification.
All right.
After that, they have ongoing costs of buying premix that is not too much. For example, in 2016, the mix needed for flour was less than $4 per metric ton of flour, which can feed millions of people, as well as drive vitamins and minerals to those people.
In fact, Martha, allow me to cut you short because I was about to ask you, are there standards for food fortification?
Yes, there are standards for food fortification that are embedded in the National Food Fortification Strategy. And these standards are not just for Kenya, they are East African standards for food fortification because we have a lot of cross-border trade and movement of maize, wheat, salt, and all these products across borders. And so for those standards, for each fortification vehicle, there is a minimum requirement for amount of vitamins and minerals that are supposed to be included per kilogram of flour.
All right. And you know, it's good you've said that, but in reality, Martha, talk to us about some of the challenges with compliance of food fortification products. I mean, food fortification standards by food industries, especially for mandatory products such as salt, wheat, and the maize flour.
I think processors are facing a number of challenges in maintaining the standards, complying with the law, and fortifying their foods. And one of the main issues that the millers are facing is actually access to the premix. So there is not proper control of what premix comes in, where millers can get it, and even a miller is in the village in Makueni County, for example, then they do not know where to access the premix to meet the standard. There is also a challenge with availability of appropriate dosing systems because you know that per kilogram, there's a minimum quantity of vitamin or mineral that should be added. And if you don't have an appropriate doser, then you may either put more or less. And so dosing systems are things that the government should provide to millers if they're supposed to put the appropriate dose.
All right.
There is also a standard operating procedure for those dosing systems, the premix specification, and they also just lack general capacity on inventory management. And the final one is our quality control systems, monitoring fortification by either on-spot checks or lab tests to inform the market that we are fortifying appropriately or inappropriately.
Right.
So the relevant government institutions like the National Bureau of Standards, the Food Safety Unit in the Ministry of Health do not have sufficient budgets and capacity to monitor and guide millers on whether they are complying, and they also do not have sufficient capacity to enforce the law on fortification.
All right. And you know, when we're beginning this conversation, Martha, I like the fact that you brought about the issue of malnutrition. And you know, Kenya is also faced with a double burden of malnutrition or overnutrition on the rise, especially in urban areas. What do you have to say about this and during this time of COVID-19?
I think that the drivers of under and overnutrition are almost similar in our society. We eat a lot of starch and carbohydrate foods, and that is what we feed our children. And so since our children's stomachs are very small, they take a little of it that cannot meet the nutrients that they need, and the adult will take a lot of it that fills the stomach, but does not also provide the nutrients they need, but increases their weight because they are energy foods. And so we need a diet approach to this problem to address both over and undernutrition.
Right.
And we're seeing an increase in overnutrition, particularly in urban areas. You walk 3 to 5 kilometers, you will see all sorts of food retail shops that are providing junk foods, me fries, KFC, Domino's, and that is what the population in Nairobi predominantly feeds.
But then, Martha, but then, Martha, I mean, someone would argue, like when I go to some of the fast food joints, I'm eating chicken. Chicken is a balanced diet. I'm having maybe fries, that's potatoes. It also has nutrients. And then probably I'm given like something like a coleslaw, something like, you know, a vegetable salad. It also has nutrients. So I'll just argue out my case like I'm having a balanced diet at the end of the day.
So that is the problem, because that is not a balanced diet. An average plate should include nutrients from 5 food groups. But if most of our plates have half of it has the starch or the carbohydrate, the potato or the ugali or the rice, and then a very small portion has the vegetables, and then you have a lot of cholesterol added in it in the name of salad creams, and then you also have a lot of fat used to cook it. Then you are just ingesting a lot of foods that will have you add weight rather than get the nutrients that you need. We need to increase our consumption of particularly fruits and vegetables. And that should be what is in the 3/4 of your plate rather than the starchy food or the chips.
So how do we handle this? So how do we tackle this as a country? Because I'm just trying to look at people in the far-flanked parts of this country who are experiencing drought, there's lack of food, people in the slum-dwelling areas who cannot even afford to put a balanced diet on the table, so as to say that I'm having a diet that has enough balanced nutrients. How do we tackle this as a country?
I think we need a multi-sectoral approach to this. There's not one single sector that will provide a single intervention that will address the nutrition issues in this country. So we need to look at the food systems, the production systems, focus on improving capacity of producers and providing seed and fertilizer to produce diversified food products without a focus on commercialization and with a trade-off between production for consumption and production for marketing. The second thing that we need to do is develop a multi-sectoral approach to this process. From the production subsystem, what is happening with the retail, storage, transportation subsystem on the food systems? And so we need to ensure that we have integrated interventions, nutrition education, behavior change interventions, diversification of diets through the food systems, as well as supplementary feeding for the populations that have no access to food at all, or where production systems have been affected by climate issues, for example. But beyond that, what is most sustainable is to address the underlying causes of undernutrition. For example, if it's a water issue, what can the water sector do to support these populations to produce food? If it's a locust issue, what is the most sustainable thing to do? In the short term, provide food through social protection systems. In the medium term, build a resilience and response plan that will enable these people to be able to access foods in future and absorb those shocks.
All right, but then Martha, you know, the reality that you're facing right now as a country and globally is that COVID-19 is making it harder for vulnerable people to actually access healthy food.
So in response to COVID-19, I think the government has put in place a response plan that includes a food supplementation plan or distribution plan for communities that need food now. And Nutrition International also provides a supplementation program for communities that need specific nutrients now. In the medium term, we need a resilience building plan where communities are cushioned from these shocks when they come again in future. And so we know that this is a health crisis that is leading to an economic crisis that will eventually lead to a diet crisis and a hunger crisis. And so what we need to do is look at all these boxes of issues and give very context-specific interventions. For example, a person in Turkana will need food immediately. A person in Vihiga County will need behavior change interventions that will demonstrate to them what kinds of locally available foods they can combine to maximize the dietary intake. A person in Turkana in the medium term will need food now. So food distribution will be required in the short term, but in the long term, we need a plan that addresses the underlying causes of food security and nutrition in those arid and semi-arid areas. And this includes water and agriculture production systems.
I like the way you've actually put it out very clearly that, everyone has a role to play. We need the private partnership, the public and also the private sector and also the civil society to help out in that. But is there a need to improve fortification in Kenya? And if so, how do you go about it as a country?
For fortification specifically, I think we need to enhance the policy environment. I think many people go to the supermarket, they see fortified foods, and they don't know what that means. And so we need some public awareness on why fortify and why should you select a fortified food product and leave what is not fortified. We also need to improve political support for fortification. And the political will in this country is in abundance. But to what extent are we aware of exactly what needs to be done? We have policy documents that are gathering dust on the shelf. Can we translate those into actions for the industry and the market level practitioners, as well as the consumer? Then the fourth one is improving availability of those fortified foods. And how do we do that? We need to support the small and medium scale millers to be able to fortify adequately with capacity and the doses that they need for that. We also need to strengthen our regulatory frameworks at the market and the milling level to ensure that anything that is labeled fortified is actually fortified, and to ensure that industry requirements are always met, and also the dissemination of the Kenya Bureau of Standard developed standard for premixes.
But then, Martha,
the formulation.
Yeah, but then, Martha, that is where the rubber meets the road, because as I go to the market, to the shop to buy this food product that has been said that it's been fortified, it goes back to what I'd asked you. How sure am I that this product has actually been fortified?
Yes, and so that is now where KEBS comes in, and also the public health laboratories. And as I mentioned before, they do not have sufficient budget to enforce and to ensure compliance. So two things: consumer awareness is very important, as well as support for public health officers to be able to monitor compliance and enforcement, and maybe develop innovative technologies and services that will allow industries to enhance their performance in fortification.
All right.
But generating public demand for fortified foods is very essential. Providing awareness, protecting the consumer. And we know that unsafe foods negate the importance of fortification. And there's suboptimal consumer awareness on the value of choosing fortified foods.
Right.
More understanding is needed on consumer knowledge, consumer attitudes, consumer practices for the purchase and consuming of fortified foods. And consumer awareness can be increased by updating and disseminating the national social marketing and communication strategy for fortification.
All right. And as we bring this conversation to an end, Martha, I like what you've said, that there's need for consumer awareness, engaging the public, talking to them about food fortification. But when you talk about food fortification, which foods are supposed to be fortified?
So in the national food fortification standards, and even the East African ones, we have selected foods according to the fact that consumers can afford them, they are readily available, and they are foods that are already consumed by a large population and can be used as vehicles for fortification. So we have maize flour, we have wheat flour, we have fats and oils, and these are to be fortified with specific vitamins and minerals. So maize flour, wheat flour, fats and oils, and salt.
Did you say soap?
Oil, maize flour, wheat flour, milk, salt, cereals, that is maize and wheat flour, and sugar.
All right, so even cereals should be fortified?
Yeah, so cereals, I mean maize flour and wheat flour.
Oh, okay, because I was about to ask cereals like the green grams, the beans, how should they be fortified?
No, because we select vehicles that are consumed by a large population.
All right, all right.
Yeah, so cereals, maize and wheat flour, oil, milk, salt, and sugar.
All right, Martha Nyagaya, asante sana for joining us here in KTN News Center. She is the country director at Nutrition International, talking to us about food fortification. Martha, thank you so much for joining us here in KTN News Center. We've also learned a lot when it comes to food fortification here in the country. Now, another short commercial break here on KTN News Center. I'll be right back with more news making the headlines during this second hour, so keep with KTN News.